Hey everybody, it's Jack and Ollie here from Be Mobile Physiotherapy, and today in this video we want to talk to you about rotator cuff tears, a really common issue in our community. But before we start to talk about rotator cuff tears, we want to talk about what the rotator cuff is.
Yeah, so mate, the rotator cuff is a group of small muscles, and there's four of them in fact, and they have an important role around our shoulder. So the main role is to rotate the humerus, okay? But they also have an important job when it comes to lifting your arm out to the side, up over your head, amongst various other movements. So a very important little group of muscles.
Okay, now whilst they're really important, a really good study showed that they're actually quite common. So what they did was they took 664 ordinary people from the community in this particular study, and what they did was do an ultrasound image of their shoulder. And what they found was 22% of those people, and it was an average age of 69 by the way, 22% of those people, or 147 people, had full thickness rotator cuff tears.
Okay, so that's a lot of people. Now, I don't think we have that many people walking around with lots of shoulder symptoms, which leads us to a point later in the study. But the first thing they found was that as people got older, they went through the decades of their life, the prevalence of rotator cuff tears went up. Okay, so it's an age-related change for sure. Now, that other point that I just mentioned was that as the decades went up, the rate of symptoms with a full rotator cuff tear went down. Okay?
Yeah, so people in their 60s and above, 2/3 of those people with full thickness rotator cuff tears did not have any symptoms or dysfunction. So that is double the amount of people with no symptoms compared to people with symptoms.
Wow, so I guess given that there's so many people in their older years without symptoms, it's fair to say that this is more of an age-related change than an injury.
Yeah, and it could be more normal than we think. And it could also tell us that rotator cuff tears do not necessitate pain. Just because you have a rotator cuff tear doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get pain.
Okay, which kind of answers my next question, mate, is if you have a rotator cuff tear, what should you do about it?
Well, if you don't know about it, nothing. You just continue on living. But we think firstly, educating yourself on the topic if you do have a rotator cuff tear, that's really important. That's what you're doing right now. We also think exercise, and in particular strength training, is great for increasing the resilience around your shoulder so that you continue doing the things you want to do. So what we're going to do now, mate, is show them 3 exercises for your shoulders that you can do at home. Okay, so we promised you 3 exercises you can do at home to increase the resilience and robustness of your shoulders. Now, it's really important to say that if you do find any of the exercises unmanageable or intolerable, you don't have to necessarily do that exercise. Make sure you first give it a try and try all the alterations that we show you in this video.
Now, on that note, if you are getting some symptoms, that's fine for you to keep going with the exercises. In fact, we would expect those symptoms to improve as you build some tolerance to the load and to the movements. So if you're getting some tolerable symptoms, that's fine. Keep up the exercise.
Alrighty, mate. Now, we're just going to use some dumbbells that we've got up here at the studio, but of course you can use any weight you have around the house. That could be a book, could be milk bottles, could be some spare dumbbells you have lying around the house, whatever you can pick up and use.
Okay, so mate, our first exercise is going to be one of the ones that we use a lot up here in the studio, the overhead press. Okay. So for this one, Jack's going to take his 2 dumbbells, holding them at shoulder height and simply pressing them up over his head. Now this is a good one for challenging all the muscles around the shoulder, but in particular the rotator cuff, because we are reaching up over the head, which is a very challenging movement. Now, for some people with sensitive shoulders, standing upright like this is going to be quite a bit more challenging. So we're going to show you an alternative to make this one a bit more manageable. Okay. So what Jack's going to do is sit down in a chair with a back. Okay, and he's actually going to lean right against the backrest. So what you can see now is that his torso is gone to a bit of an angle rather than being perfectly up and down. So that's making it just a little bit easier for him to get his hands up over his head. All right, and hopefully for some people that will reduce the symptoms, make it a bit more manageable.
Yeah, and I would say another tip might be to hold things differently. So maybe that's a little bit too painful there, but maybe I bring my arms in a bit. and maybe that changes the symptoms and makes it a bit more tolerable.
For sure. And of course you can try using a lighter weight. You might just do 1 dumbbell or 1 milk bottle. That's the first thing to try if there are a lot of pain, if there is a lot of pain associated with that movement.
Cool. So the overhead press, and as you said, you can reduce the weight. You could also reduce the range of motion. So you might just do some small overhead presses to start and then get all the way above your head once it's a bit more tolerable.
That's right. Okay.
Okay.
Exercise number 2 is going to be a push-up. All right. So I'll demonstrate this one.
Compadre. So what we're going to do is the push-up. Now, push-ups can be done from a very easy difficulty, obviously, to a hard difficulty. Okay, so we're not going to be talking about weight. It's more going to be how close you're getting towards the ground, really. So the first type of push-up to do is on a bench, okay, a kitchen bench or a table. We're going to pretend this is a table or kitchen bench. Obviously, you'd want something a little bit more sturdy than the back of a chair like this. All you're going to be doing is putting your chest down to your hands, keeping your body nice and straight like a plank of wood, okay? Now, for a lot of people, this might produce some symptoms, okay, that they really don't like and maybe are intolerable. So what you can do is play around with your hand position. Now, whilst we can't show you a really wide grip here, you might start a bit more wider, or you might go more narrow to change, okay? Change the angles of the shoulders. Beautiful, just like that. Now, once that becomes too easy, we can then do a knee push-up, either on the chair or the floor. Okay, so you might chuck something underneath your knees and do the exact same thing. This might be on a table or a low couch, and that's slightly harder, but still pretty manageable. And if that's too easy, of course, we can do a knee push-up on the ground, and this is really good for loading up the shoulder and making it more and more robust. Just like that. Excellent. Okay, so remember the tips for that are start at a very manageable level, so that might be up on the kitchen bench. Then you might progress lower and lower towards the ground. And of course you can change your hand position.
Yeah.
Any other tips for that one, mate?
Well, I think just like with the overhead press, you can reduce the range of motion. So if you are getting symptoms with any of those variations, you might try just going halfway down. Don't worry about getting your chest all the way down to the surface.
Okay, now the third exercise we're going to show you is a great one called lateral raises.
Now, mate, I know you love these, so I'm going to hand you the dumbbells and I'll talk you through it. So one of the important actions of the rotator cuff is to help with that shoulder abduction, or taking the arm away from the body. So that's what we're going to replicate with this exercise. Holding the dumbbells by his side, Jack's just bringing the arms out to 90 degrees, like so. Nice and simple, okay? And you can see that we've got some lighter dumbbells for this one because it is quite a challenging movement.
Yeah.
All right. Now, for some people, that's going to be pretty challenging. So to make it a bit easier, what we can do is shorten the length of the arm artificially by bending the elbows, like Jack's done there, and then he can do the same movement and hopefully find it a little bit easier.
Yeah, okay. Just like that.
Beautiful.
What are some other ways that might modify the movement to make it a bit easier?
Once again, you could make it a smaller movement. Just go out to half the movement of the shoulders there, okay? You could even do it more in front, all right? Sometimes that can be a little bit more tolerable, though it is a slightly different movement. Yep. That would be a fine alternative. Even turning the thumbs up, that can make it a little more tolerable sometimes. So made a few things to experiment with there to make the movements here a little bit easier, more tolerable for people with sensitive shoulders.
Yeah.
And if you can progress on those movements over time, we would expect your symptoms to resolve and certainly build some strength and capacity in your shoulders.
Yeah, so once again, it's all right to have some pain in these areas, especially when you do have a sensitive shoulder, as you said. Now, in terms of how many to do, what do you reckon?
Well, we would start with 2 to 3 sets of somewhere between 8 and 15 repetitions. And as always, making sure that whichever number of repetitions you do, it's challenging for you. And what we mean by challenging is leaving about 2 or 3 repetitions left in the tank at the end of each set.
Okay, so for example, if I was doing the overhead press with 2 kilos and I got to 10 repetitions and I could only fit in 2 more, that means I've only got a couple of repetitions left in the tank.
And that would be a perfect amount of challenge for you.
Okay, awesome. So that's 3 pretty simple exercises you can do at home. Remember, you don't have to be able to do them all, but try the variations and see what suits you. And remember that just because you've got a rotator cuff tear doesn't necessarily mean you'll get pain. And even if you do, we can try to work around that as much as possible.
For sure. Okay, see you next time.